But I think one of the eye-opening experiences in working with students, and it goes and deals with the technology issue. We rush out in this field of library and information science. We rush out. We see something new and shiny, and a lot of my colleagues will jump on the bandwagon and say, "Hey, this is the new direction. This is where they're heading." It reminds me of the people in the French Revolution at times when they look out the window and they see the people running down the street and they're going, "They're my people. I need to lead them." Well, by the time you run down to the main floor of the building and run down the street, they're already around the corner. I think the catch is let's not play catch up. At times, sometimes a fad is just a fad. And we jump on something and we use it and we thought, well, we'll create it for students. But no one asks the question, are students really using the technology or using the device that we've created? And there are the mentality is if we create something, we created it. We don't want to throw it away because we spent all the time and the resources on it. There are times when you just have to walk away. It doesn't work. And I think that's the key, is just letting it go. And asking students, is this helpful? I mean, creating a citation guide for me is important because that's what I do. It's my field. I want to make things easy, but I have to inform students that it's not the answer to all their questions. It's not. It's just to help them get to the next stage in research. But the question would be how do students learn? And what I've discovered is that students they say they like technology, but sometimes the simplest things are the most effective way to communicate to a student. And instead of making it all fancy, and they'll say, well, we like this fancy, flashy stuff. Well, yeah, you do, but in reality, no one watches it. And so why do I create it? And if you don't, I think one has to be careful as not jumping on the bandwagon and thinking that the fad that a student is heading down on that's the new direction. Sometimes just taking a pause, as you said, and just looking at what's going on, how the direction of the technology is taking us, and then stepping in at times, and not playing the catch up, but more of seeing where the direction is, and then creating and establish a tutorial or a guide or some form of technology, using some form of technology to help students, because the students will eventually, they will see it if you promote it and say this is it, and the buy-in is the word of mouth. They will say, hey, this is a really good tool, you should use it. I think that's the success where I come, is I have the students taking a look at what I've created, and the word of mouth spreads. I don't have to tell them this is really good. I can say it's really good and students will never touch it, but if another student will, then that's the plus. My biggest fear, I think, isn't the students that say thank you. It's not the students that praise, they like it. It's the ones that don't say anything. That frightens me. The ones that walk out the door, and I know my colleagues have that they give a lecture, and maybe they have one student that walk out the door and you're going, wow, I gave a really good lecture and no one's saying anything. I've said that once in a while. I'm going, I hope, because it's those individuals that I want to communicate with, those that don't say anything. Because if they didn't like something, it didn't work, I want to know why, because I can improve it.
Well, to piggyback on that, not with technology, but just in new methods that I'm trying with my students, like I'll try something new, and you think it's great in your own head. You're thinking, oh yeah, this is really going to work. But I give them periodic assessments. So I try something new, and then I give them some comment sheets, and I say, well, how did that work? What did you get out of it? What can I do better? What didn't you get? What could have been added? So I get some feedback from them to find out if something is working or it's not working. If it's something successful, I'll bring it back. If it's something I need to work on, then I might keep it hidden for a semester, so and work on it and then bring it back again. So I mean, it's the beauty of getting them to talk to you, and the quiet ones are the ones that you really want to reach, and you can usually get them to say something on paper so that you can figure out what's going on.
I think the thread running through this discussion, at least what I'm taking from it, is that not to sound curt, but you need to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You need to understand when it works, when it doesn't work, and you need to get an assessment tool that allows you to get that feedback instead of you reflecting at the end of the semester and just holding your thumb up. So one of the things that I think is very helpful, and it leads to Rick's answer, which he's not here to hear, but one of the things that provided me with the epiphany, kind of the transformation from what I was as an instructor to what I am as an instructor now, not coincidentally, took place about the time that the internet emerged, but I think that's a byproduct more than the cause. It was when I discovered that the format of lecturing is not the most effective format in higher education. That certainly there are things that professors know that students don't, by definition almost. But clearly it is not, to use the trite phrase, it is not the sage on the stage, it really is the guide on the side. It really does take a transformation to de-emphasize your knowledge and background and encourage and emphasize the peer group's knowledge and background. This came flying home to me one day when I was giving a lecture in my methods class, and they're in a lab with computers right in front of them. And I was talking, I can't even remember the concept, but I was talking about a concept, and before I'd even gotten to the end of the paragraph, it was clear that somebody had Googled it in the World Lecture Hall, gone to another class in the universe of online education, gotten their read on it, raised their hands and said, well, what about this? And they gave the parallax view of another professor in another place, another time, almost instantly. And it was at that point that I reflected on the experience and said, you know, if we as professors don't recognize this phenomena, and we don't de-emphasize our pool of knowledge and re-emphasize the collective pool of knowledge, we're never going to get students where they need to be in this world. And so since that time, there are all sorts of cute ways of doing it, flipping the classroom, doing this, doing that. But what I found is ultimately it resorts to paying attention to where students are, understanding where you want them to be, and then establishing a roadmap for helping guide them there. And I think if you can do that, you're probably in a better situation in the classroom than we have been for the last 1,400 years.
Partly contrary to you, it seems to me that there are disciplines in which expressing a sort of holistic consensus body of knowledge is more appropriate, and there are disciplines like ours where parallax views are sort of all there is, and presenting the road might have benefit, might have value.
Well, if I understand your question correctly, clearly there's a difference between having critical discourse and conveying a body of knowledge that is ex post facto there. However, even in a field like math, or even in a field where the logic is a closed system, I think there's utility in getting people to look at alternative ways of saying the same thing, discussing what those alternative ways are, and then resolving any conflicts that they see with whatever's being said in the classroom. That doesn't detract from the fact that it's a holistic approach. It just means that there are lots of different people in the world saying the same thing, and I have discovered that rather than get a student to listen to what you have to say and spit it back on a test, comparing it to a book, it's much more effective to have them compare what I say to what Professor B says, and by the time they come back the next week, they're saying, hey, it sounds like he said something very different than you. And then we get to spend time in the classroom resolving that conflict. I find that glues the material to their head, to their brain, to their long-term memory much better than just listening to what I have to say and comparing it to the book.
I meant the latter and the opposite of the idea that in sociology there might not be any two people who think the same thing.
And typically aren't.
We're coming up on the end of the hour, and I know some people have 2 o'clock classes, so I just want to wrap up. Maybe if you could each say a few words about what you find the most rewarding about working with students.
I'll start.
Okay.
I think there are many things I find rewarding for students, and when I first started off in my career, I never thought I would ever be a faculty member in an office working with students. That was not anywhere on the agenda. And I would hear people talk about the light bulb kicking on, and you could see it. But it's this immense gratitude, this great passion that they have for what they're doing, and yet I can help them in one way, shape, or form, help them, guide them, point them in a direction. And that's part. The other part is sometimes sitting in an office and getting the student that walks by, and one of my colleagues experienced this with me when it was two days last year. It was 2 days into the semester. My colleagues in the office were talking about something, and a student walked by and asked a question, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she broke down and cried. And I'm thinking, well, the semester hasn't even started yet, really. And it was just realizing that it seemed so new. It was a world that she had never thought she would ever be in, and it was frightening. And just talking to her and realizing that what I do now is not only my job, but it is part of that counseling of just listening. And it's that listening component. And there are times, I agree that sometimes you hear a lot more than what you would think they should tell you, and more of their personal story. But at the end of the day, I think when just listening, that's all they need sometimes, is someone to listen to them. And when I walk away and I feel like I made a difference, sometimes I think, do I make a difference? And I do. I realize I do, because I do have students or individuals come up and they tell me when they graduate, or to see that pure joy that they've made it. They'll say, "I've made it." I'm like, I'm very glad. Now what's the next chapter in your life? And let's do that. That's sometimes the joy.
The one-on-one connection with the students, getting to know them, mentoring them through the process, just getting to see what they can do at the end of the semester versus the very beginning. Just seeing the growth is really rewarding for me. And then hoping to continue that relationship with them as they go into the classroom themselves.
I would third that. And it's not just a polemic. I'm actually fully vested. I should be retired. I'm handing back the university $49,000 every year I teach here, beyond this year. And I still come back because in saying the one-on-one contact, it has a very specific meaning to me. The first 20 years of teaching here was all about the material. It was all about me getting things across to students and them learning it. While that's still in the foreground, the background has totally changed. The background is now about the content of their character. It's about the development of their ability to think, not to learn. Learning follows thinking, but if you don't learn how to think, then you won't learn how to learn. So I'm forever grateful to watch this process unfold in a class like I teach. And I think it has manifested itself empirically in things that I had never experienced the first 20 years here. I still go out to lunch with people that were students of mine 10 years ago. I still have people coming back talking to me about how much they influenced their life, and they're now PhDs out teaching in some university, or they're lawyers practicing whatever, or they're social workers, or they're whatever they are. That is insanely gratifying to me because it allows me to feel connected with the world in a way that people who don't teach in higher education never experience. And I think that's probably the reason I'm still here.